So rules are important, right? I know we joke about cheat to beat, sin to win, but the truth is we all can get pretty frustrated when someone is cheating in a game we're playing or something that we're competing in. One of my favorite stories to tell about this just shows how competitive Kelly is. When we had just started dating, I think it had been about 6 months at this point, she came out to visit me at my parents' house in Michigan, and we were playing a game with my whole family, and it was fast paced. There was a lot happening. Everybody's moving really fast. Kelly was on my team, and my family sometimes can take the cheat to beat, sin to win thing a little too seriously, especially my dad. My dad was cheating in the game, and it was pretty obvious, and he was laughing about it and denying it, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Kelly just starts like screaming at him and calls him out in the middle of the game, and you could see this fire in her eyes. And I think that's the point that I knew that I was going to marry her. But it's tough when people cheat in games, but when that happens, there's usually a punishment. Either the ref calls them out and calls a foul, and there's consequences for them, or the group catches someone cheating. But regardless, there's usually consequences, right? The tough thing here is there are quite a few people who cheat in life. And a lot of the time, they don't really have to deal with the consequences. People do wrong and hurtful things all the time and don't have to deal with consequences. And throughout the Bible, you'll find a lot of talk about justice. Scripture says that God is a God of justice. God invites us to act justly. And the Bible tells us that Jesus came to the world to rule with justice. But what does justice mean? That's a pretty important question, because we as humans have a history of getting this wrong over and over again. But throughout Scripture, God invites us to think about justice differently. Scripture gives us an idea, gives us a vision of justice that isn't just about punishing people for what they've done wrong. It's about something much more than that. So Zechariah was a prophet of Judah, and it's in the very back of the Old Testament. It's one of the last books in the Old Testament, and Zechariah is a prophet for Judah, and this is just after they had come back from exile. They were exiled into Babylon, and then they had come back to Judah. So they had been away from their homes for a long time. Many of these people weren't even born in Judah. Most of them had been raised in Babylon, so they didn't really know of their, quote, homeland. But the reason the people were exiled of Israel were exiled in the first place is because they were not following the rules that God had placed for them. They were not following the way that God had laid out to them. So Zechariah was challenging them to live like God had called them to. So let's listen to what he says in chapter 7, verses 9 and 10. This is what the Lord Almighty said: administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. Do not plot evil against each other. When God was wronged by us, God didn't simply try and punish us. Instead, God chose to do something much more difficult. He found a way to restore our relationship. That's God's definition of justice. And in the same way, God invites us to show the same kind of justice to each other. Not simply to punish each other when we hurt each other, but to find a way to restore the relationship through mercy and compassion. Tonight we're going to talk about a little bit of Romans 5 and looking at the justice of God. But when we see how God has treated us, that's how he's calling us to treat other people. So let that be a challenge for you tonight.